How does a quiet father go from standing at his own son's memorial in his family home to watching the police knock on his daughter-in-law's door the next morning? How do the people you raise decide you are a burden, and why would that make you sell everything and plan a one-way exit to another country? This is how I went from being in the way on my son's couch to being the one person who held all the papers that really mattered. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Samuel Ward, but everyone calls me Sam. I am 64 years old, a retired structural engineer, and for most of my life I thought I understood what it meant to be the head of a family. I built our house with my own hands. I helped my son start his company. I tried to be steady and useful, not loud. For years, that seemed enough. On the day of my son Ryan's memorial, I learned how wrong I was about my place in the family I thought I had. The community chapel hall was full before I arrived. Cars lined the street, and people in dark clothes moved in small groups toward the open doors. I parked a little farther away than I had to, out of habit. I have always liked to leave the close spots for others. Inside, a slideshow of Ryan's life played on a screen at the front. There were photos from school, from the early days of his construction firm, from his wedding to Olivia. I noticed that in many of the recent photos, I was not there. I remembered standing just outside the frame when those pictures were taken. I stayed near the back wall while people found seats. Olivia stood close to the front with her parents. Her hair and dress were perfect, and people moved toward her in a steady line. They put hands on her shoulder. They said soft things. She nodded and touched their arms with a tired smile. My daughter Lena stood next to her, one hand on Olivia's back, the other holding a program. From where I stood, I saw my own name printed on that little piece of paper. In loving memory, organized by his wife Olivia Ward and father Samuel Ward. It was accurate, but it did not feel true. Olivia had chosen the hall and the photos. I had simply paid for everything. When people noticed me, they gave small nods and said that Ryan had been a good man. Some patted my arm. No one stayed long. The line for Olivia was the main river. I was more like a small pond off to the side. A few of Ryan's old coworkers came up and mentioned the days when he and I worked late on site plans, how he always said he had learned his patience from me. I smiled and said that he had passed me long ago. That was something I used to say with pride. Today it felt like I was repeating a story that no one really listened to anymore. The service itself passed in a blur. The minister spoke about Ryan's energy, his charm, his leadership. Olivia walked up and spoke about how Ryan was the center of their home. She said that he made the house feel young and full of light. She did not mention that I had designed that house, poured the concrete for its foundation, and stayed many nights with a headlamp checking that the framing was perfect. I did not need the credit, but I felt the absence of my part like a small hollow under each word. After the service, people moved to the house. We had planned it that way from the beginning. The Ward house sits on a quiet street with an old maple tree in front and a long, low porch that wraps around the side. I know every joint and nail in that porch. I could tell you which boards I had to replace after a storm 10 years ago. That day, though, it did not feel like my work. Rented chairs and tables filled the living room and dining area. Caterers rushed in and out of the kitchen. Olivia's parents stood like hosts at the entrance to the main room, greeting people as if this had always been their space. When I stepped through the door, a young man in a black shirt with a catering logo asked if I was family or guest. I told him I lived there, and he nodded quickly and moved away. It was a small thing, but it landed heavier than I expected. I had turned what used to be my home office into my bedroom 2 years earlier when Olivia and Ryan said they needed the big upstairs room for the kids. I agreed, of course. It seemed natural at the time. A family grows. The older person takes the smaller corner. I did not understand what that shift would mean later. Olivia's mother waved me over to the kitchen and placed a tray in my hands. She said that it would help if I brought out more glasses. I said that I could do that. Carrying dishes felt easier than standing in the middle of the crowd with my hands doing nothing. I moved between the counters and the tables, refilling drinks, picking up used plates, nodding at people as they spoke about Ryan's energy, his talent, his bright future. At one point, someone suggested a group photo near the fireplace. I heard Olivia say that they should get one with the core family. People gathered quickly. I started to walk over, then felt a hand on my arm. Lena stood there, her face gentle but firm. She told me that they would do one with Olivia and the kids first, and that later there would be plenty of time for more pictures. I nodded and stepped back. The later never came. I watched as Olivia stood in the middle with the children, her parents on one side, Lena and her husband on the other. The photographer raised the camera, called for them to smile, and the moment froze into pixels. I stood by the kitchen doorway, partly hidden behind a hanging plant. It was my house, but in that picture, there was no sign I existed. I went back to the kitchen and started stacking empty plates. One of Ryan's friends stopped next to me and said that I should sit down, that someone else could handle the clearing. I told him that I liked to keep my hands busy. It was true, but it was also easier to be the person who cleaned up than the person who had to look for a place to sit in his own living room. Later in the afternoon, the room grew louder. People had eaten, and some had moved on from soft words to shared stories and light laughter. The children ran down the hall, the little one still too young to understand what was going on. Olivia's father turned up the music a little, something calm and modern. The house felt like it was shifting from formal sorrow to something looser. I was standing by the dining table, adjusting a chair that wobbled on the rug when I heard Lena call my name. I turned and saw her standing near the doorway to the living room, gesturing for me to come join. She had that careful smile she uses when she wants to say something difficult, but wants it to sound reasonable. I wiped my hands on a napkin and walked over. Lena told me that Olivia needed space to breathe, for herself and the children. She said that having me in the house full-time made things feel heavy, and that everyone thought it might be better if I considered moving to a smaller place. She added that this did not mean they did not care about me. She said it was only practical. She used words like transition and next phase. I listened and felt a slow ache in my chest, not sharp, just steady. I asked her in a calm voice whether this was her idea or Olivia's. She said that they had talked about it together and that they both agreed. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I have spent my life solving problems by looking at facts, not shouting. At that moment, the facts were clear. They had made plans without me. A little later, Olivia stood up in the center of the living room. She called for everyone's attention with a gentle clap of her hands. The room grew quiet. People turned their chairs toward her. I stood in the doorway to the dining area, close enough to hear everything, far enough that I could have stepped away if I wanted. I did not step away. Olivia thanked everyone for coming to honor Ryan. She spoke about how strong the family was, how they would move forward, how the house would continue to be a warm space for the children. Then, in a smooth voice, she said that with things changing so much, there would also be changes at home. She explained that I would be moving out within 30 days to give the kids more room and give me a chance to find a place that suited my stage of life. She said that she knew everyone would support this decision. For a moment, I thought I had heard her wrong. 30 days. That was the time limit for moving furniture, not people. The guests shifted in their seats. Some looked at me, then quickly away. I saw one of Ryan's co-workers open his mouth and then close it. No one spoke up. No one said that it seemed sudden or cold or that it might not be the right time. They just let her words sit in the air like they were normal. I felt every eye that refused to meet mine. I also noticed one more thing. Across the street, through the front windows, I could see our neighbor, Mrs. Annika Talwar, standing on her porch. She held her phone up at chest height, the screen glowing faintly. She had always been fond of Ryan and kind to me. I could not hear her from there, of course, but I could guess what she was doing. People record everything now. It is just what they do. When Olivia finished speaking, the room stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then someone turned the music up again, just a little. A few people stood, walked toward her, and told her she was brave. Others went back to their conversations, only now their voices were softer. The children ran past my legs, chasing a balloon. It was like the house had swallowed her announcement and decided to keep going. I did not make a scene. I walked over to her, said that I heard her plan, and that I would not stand in the way. She nodded once, her eyes already moving past me to someone else. Lena approached and touched my arm, saying that it would all work out, that they would help me find a place. I said that there was no need to worry about that. My voice sounded very even in my own ears, like I was giving a report at a job site. I went down the hall to my small room. The walls were lined with shelves that used to hold project folders and reference books. Now they carried boxes of toys and extra bedding. My bed was a narrow frame against the far wall with a small table beside it. On the table lay my glasses, a simple alarm clock, and an old photo of Ryan and me standing in front of the house when it was just fresh concrete and framing. I opened the closet and pulled out my worn travel bag. I placed it on the bed and started to fold my clothes. I chose simple things, 2 pairs of trousers, a few shirts, underthings, socks, a sweater. I took my shaving kit from the bathroom and slipped it into the side pocket. I checked the drawers and picked up a thin folder that held my passport, a copy of my birth certificate, and some old bank papers I had never bothered to move. That folder went into the bag as well. I did not rush. I worked slowly, like I was packing for a short work trip, not walking away from almost 20 years in that house. When I was done, I looked around the room. The shelves, the bed, the chair by the window. None of it truly belonged to me anymore. The only things that felt like mine were now inside the bag at my feet. The sky outside the window had turned a soft blue-gray. Guests were starting to leave. I could hear car doors closing, engines starting. I picked up the bag, turned off the light, and stepped into the hallway. No one was there. The living room was still half full, but people were facing away, talking in small clusters. I moved quietly along the wall until I reached the front door. On the porch, the air felt cool and clean. I closed the door behind me with care, not wanting it to slam. Across the street, Mrs. Talwar was still on her porch. She lowered her phone slightly and gave me a long, steady look. There was concern in her face and something else, a kind of quiet anger that did not belong to me but seemed to be there on my behalf. I gave her a small nod and started down the steps, my bag heavy in my hand and the house I had built standing behind me like it already belonged to someone else. I woke up in the motel before the alarm rang. For a few seconds, I did not remember where I was. The ceiling was low and stained, a small brown mark near the light fixture. The air smelled like old cleaning spray and something fried from the diner next door. I turned my head and saw my travel bag on the chair, the same bag I had carried out of my house the night before. Then my memory caught up. The memorial, the speech, the 30 days. I lay there and watched the shadows on the ceiling move as cars passed outside. The bed was narrow, but I had slept on worse. In my early years on building sites, there had been nights on fold-out cots, and once even in a car when a storm cut the road to the hotel. Physical discomfort does not scare me. What pressed on my chest now was not the thin pillow. It was the idea that, in a few sentences, my place in my own home had been treated like something that could be erased with a neat plan and a polite tone. When I could not lie still any longer, I swung my legs over the side of the bed and sat up. The room was plain, one small table, one chair, a mirror that made my face look a little more tired than I felt. I washed my face in the tiny bathroom sink and looked at myself. Same gray hair, same lines around the eyes, same hands that had carried beams, drawn plans, signed contracts. The world had not changed overnight, but my address had. I made a cup of weak coffee with the small machine on the table and sat in the chair with my hands around the paper cup. The warmth helped a little. My mind drifted back to the first time I saw the open plot where the Ward house would stand one day. Ryan was in his late 20s then, full of ideas. He had just left a big company and wanted to start his own firm. I remember him spreading sketches on my kitchen table, his eyes bright as he talked about affordable houses built with care, not shortcuts. He said he wanted a place of his own, too, a house with a wraparound porch and space for children to run. I had already spent 3 decades as an engineer by then. My body was tired, but my hands still itched for new work. We bought the plot together. I put in most of the money and told him we would figure out the details later. We stood there in the dirt, wind pulling at our jackets, and I saw the house in my mind already. The lines, the foundation, the beams. I told him I would help him build not just the house, but his firm. He hugged me and said that one day it would all be mine again anyway. Through him, I did not correct him. I did not tell him that my goal was not to own more things, but to see him stand steady on his own feet. Those months were hard and good at the same time. We worked side by side. I taught him how to read the soil, how to check that a line was truly straight, how to listen to that small doubt in his head when something felt off. He showed me new software, new methods, things that made my old habits cleaner and faster. When the foundation set and the frame went up, we took a picture together in front of it. It is the same picture that sat on my bedside table, the one I put back into my bag last night. After the house was done and the firm started to bring in clients, we met with a lawyer at Adrian's small office. Ryan's business was growing. I had helped him get his first contracts by calling old contacts, vouching for him. Adrian suggested we think about how to protect the house and the company if something ever happened. At the time, I took "if something ever happened" to mean market trouble, lawsuits, things like that, not what would actually come later. We sat at a round table in Adrian's office, papers spread out like a fan. Adrian spoke about a family trust. He said it would be wise to put the house and Ryan's shares into it, with clear rules about what would happen as years passed. I asked him once, quietly, whether I would still be able to live in the house as long as I needed. He nodded and said, of course, that we would write it that way. I remember signing my name many times. Ryan signed too, joking that there were more signatures that day than on his school papers. I did not read every line. I admit that. I trusted Adrian and I trusted my own son. They both told me what I needed to know in simple terms. The house would be safe, the firm would be safe, and my place in both would be safe. We moved on. There was always more work to do, more roofs to check, more clients to call. When Ryan met Olivia, I was happy for him. She was bright, confident, good at talking to people. She helped him find new clients, build a brand, whatever that meant. She knew how to present things online, how to make simple projects look polished. At first, she was kind to me. She would ask about my old projects, bring me tea when I sat at the table with plans spread out. Over time, small changes began to appear. She suggested moving my tools from the garage to a storage unit so there would be more space for the children's bikes and toys. It made sense, so I agreed. She rearranged the living room and asked me to move an old armchair I liked to the back room because it looked too heavy in photos. Again, I agreed. It was only furniture. The change with my bedroom came later, after the second child was on the way. Olivia came to me with Ryan by her side and said they wanted the upstairs bedroom for the kids. She said it would be easier to have them close together and that I could use the small office downstairs. Ryan looked at me with that hopeful expression, like he wanted me to say yes before I even thought. I did not need to think long. I told them I would move that weekend. My body did not love the stairs anyway. I made jokes, tried to keep the mood light, but when I moved my things into the smaller room, something inside me shifted too. It was not just about square meters. It was about how easily my place in the house could be changed. The big bedroom went from being mine to being the kids' room in a single breath. My new room was called the office, even after my desk was gone and a narrow bed took its place. Lena visited less often as the years went on. When she came, she talked more about her work and her own plans. Once, when we were alone in the kitchen, she mentioned that she and her husband had seen a nice senior complex near the lake. She said it had good reviews and exercise classes. She spoke like she was sharing helpful news, not like she was suggesting a path to move me out of the house. I laughed it off at the time, but I did not forget. These small moments came back to me now in the motel room, like stones rising through sand when the tide pulls back. None of them had felt like a breaking point on their own. Together they formed a clear pattern. Over time, my space had shrunk, while my role as helper and payer stayed large. I had become part of the background of my own family story. I finished the weak coffee and got dressed. I checked the folder with my passport and old bank papers in the bag, more from habit than from need. The streets outside were quiet. A light drizzle touched my face as I walked to the diner next to the motel. Inside, the air smelled of strong coffee and fried bread. I ordered a simple breakfast and sat near the window. While I ate, I did what I have always done when faced with a problem. I broke it into parts. Emotion on one side, facts on the other. On the emotion side, I wrote in my head words like hurt, disappointment, loneliness. On the fact side, I put things like, I had lived in that house for almost 20 years. I had helped pay for it. I had signed trust papers about it. I had moved out because my daughter-in-law announced a time limit in front of a room full of people. The more I thought, the clearer it became that this was not just a family disagreement. It was also a question of rights and promises. I did not want to fight Olivia and Lena. I did not want to drag anyone through long, bitter arguments. But I also did not want to vanish quietly from a house I had built with my own hands, as if I had only ever been a visitor. When I stepped back out into the drizzle, my feet turned almost on their own toward my old street. I told myself I only wanted to see the house one more time before I decided what to do. As I walked, I rehearsed quiet phrases in my mind. Maybe I would talk to Adrian and ask him to remind me what we had signed. Maybe I would just find a small place to rent and let things be. I did not have the answer yet. When I reached the corner near the ward house, I could already see something was happening. A patrol car was parked at the curb in front of the house. Its lights were not flashing. It sat there quietly, looking almost out of place on the peaceful street. 2 officers stood at the front door. Even from a distance, I recognized one of them from community events, Officer Lucia Rivera. I did not walk straight up. Instead, I turned toward the house across the street. Mrs. Talwar stood on her porch, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. She saw me and frowned with concern. She beckoned me over with a small wave. I climbed her steps and stood inside her low fence, the wood damp under my hand. She said she was sorry for what had happened the day before. She said she could not believe the way Olivia had spoken in front of everyone. I told her I appreciated her concern. My voice sounded calm, even to me. She glanced at the patrol car and then at me again. She said that when she saw me walk out with my bag last night, she could not sleep. It did not feel right to her. So in the morning, she called the non-emergency line and asked if it was okay for someone to simply tell an older family member to leave with such short notice. While we spoke, the front door opened. I could see Olivia standing there in the doorway, her arms folded tightly. The officers spoke in low voices. I could not hear the words, only the rhythm of the conversation. At one point, Olivia gestured around the hallway like she was pointing out the space. Officer Rivera listened with a neutral face, then said something that made Olivia's jaw tighten. After a few minutes, one of the officers looked across the street and noticed me standing on the porch with Mrs. Talwar. He said something to Rivera, and she turned and followed his gaze. Our eyes met. She said something to Olivia, then stepped down from the porch and walked across the street toward us. I straightened my shoulders. I felt suddenly aware of my worn jacket, my old shoes, the small bag still hanging from my hand. Rivera greeted me by name. She said she was sorry for the timing, that she had heard about the memorial the day before. She explained in a steady voice that they had received a call from a neighbor concerned about my living situation. She had also seen some information on her screen when she checked my name, records linked to the address, hints of long-term residence. I told her simply that I had lived in that house for many years and that I had left last night because Olivia announced I had 30 days to move out. Rivera nodded and said that was what they had been told as well. She said that sudden changes like that, right after a big loss, could be risky. She said it might not be her place to tell a family how to manage their home, but it was her job to make sure no one was being pushed out without proper support. She asked if I would be willing to come to the station later to give a clear statement so they could make a proper note of the situation. Her tone was careful, not forceful. She did not sound like someone looking for trouble. She sounded like someone trying to put things in order. That tone, more than her words, made me feel something loosen in my chest. I said yes. I told her I wanted things to be clear too. As we spoke, I felt again that old habit waking up inside me. The need to have all facts in one place, to write things down, to understand the structure before making any move. I had used that habit on bridges, buildings, contracts. I would use it now on my own life. At the station, the air felt different from the street. It was cooler, sharper, carrying a mix of paper, cleaning liquid, and old coffee. I had never had much business in a station before. The lobby was small, with plastic chairs against the walls and a desk at the front, where a young officer typed slowly on a keyboard. A television in the corner played a news channel with the sound low. I stood there for a moment, my hand resting on the strap of my bag, until Officer Rivera came out from a side door and called my name. She led me down a short hallway into a small room with a table and 2 chairs. There was a glass panel on one wall that looked into another room. I sat where she pointed, my back to the glass. She placed a notepad and a small recording device on the table. She told me, in that careful tone she had, that she needed to ask some questions and note my answers. She said it would help them understand what had happened and make sure everything was done properly. I told her I understood. I am used to formal processes. In engineering, you write things down. You keep records. You do not rely on memory alone when structures are involved. Now this small room and its plain table had become a kind of inspection site for my own life. She asked how long I had lived at the ward house. I told her that Ryan and I built it nearly 20 years ago and that I had moved in when it was finished. I mentioned how, after Ryan married Olivia, I stayed there, how we had agreed it would always be my home as well. I spoke slowly, keeping my voice steady. Rivera wrote down key words and sometimes repeated part of what I had said to be sure she heard me right. She asked about the memorial reception the day before. I described how people came to the house after the service. I told her about Olivia's speech, how Olivia had announced in front of everyone that I would move out within 30 days. I explained that I had not agreed to this beforehand, that it was the first time I heard about a time limit. I told her I did not want to cause a scene, so I calmly packed a bag and left that evening. She listened without interrupting, only writing and nodding. At one point she mentioned that, when she entered the house that morning, Olivia had described me as a guest who had stayed after Ryan invited me years ago. Olivia had said that with Ryan gone, it was time for me to transition to my own place. Rivera used the same phrases Olivia had used, but her voice carried no opinion, only neutral repetition. Rivera then said she had seen some information on her screen when she checked my name and the address. She said there were notes linking me to long-term residents at that house, and references to documents she could not see in full. It sounded to her, she said, like my position in the house might be more than that of a guest. She suggested that I look at any papers I had signed in the past, especially anything involving the house and family arrangements. Hearing that from someone in uniform changed something in me. It was not that I doubted Adrian or Ryan or myself. It was more that for years I had told myself these were family matters, best kept private. Now a person whose job it was to protect people was gently telling me that the line between family and legal arrangement was not so simple. My place in that house was not just a feeling. It was connected to paper. Rivera asked if I felt safe where I was staying. I told her I was at a motel and could manage for now. She suggested, with a light touch, that I bring a trusted friend or advisor with me if there were future meetings about the house. She left it at that. No pressure, just a suggestion. She gave me a card with her name and direct number. She said I could call if things changed or if I needed a copy of the report she was writing. When I left the station, the afternoon light had softened. Cars moved slowly along the street outside, and a bus stopped with a sigh of air at the corner. I slid her card into my wallet alongside my bank card and an old membership card from a hardware store. The plastic edges pressed together like pieces of a puzzle that had not yet taken shape. I walked to the coffee shop a few blocks away. It was a place I liked because it was quiet and nobody needed anything from me there. I ordered a black coffee and chose a table near the window, away from the door. When the cup arrived, I wrapped my fingers around it and let the warmth soak into my hands before taking a sip. While I sat there, my mind drifted back to a day months earlier in the back garden of the house. The light was bright that day, the grass dry and a little yellow near the edges of the stones. Olivia had asked me to come outside to talk. I remember the way she stood, arms folded, looking past me at the fence rather than directly at my face. She said she appreciated everything I had done for the family, for the house, and the firm. She said it in a tone that sounded practiced, almost like a speech from a company meeting. Then she moved on to talk about how the house now was their home, meaning hers and Ryan's. She said that while she knew I felt attached to it, it was important not to confuse ownership with sentiment. Those were her words, and they stuck in my mind. Not confuse ownership with sentiment. I had smiled then and said that I understood. I did not bring up the trust. I did not mention the papers Adrian had written. It felt rude in that moment to bring law into a sunny garden talk. I let the words pass, told myself it was just her way of trying to set boundaries in a house that had many adults under one roof. Another memory followed, this one from a dinner not long after that. We were at the table in the living room, plates of simple food in front of us. The children had already run off to their room. Olivia said casually that she and Ryan might consider selling the house one day and moving closer to the city center. She said the market was strong and that a sale could give them new options. Lena, who had come over for the evening, agreed quickly. She said it was smart to be flexible and joked that I should be grateful for the couch and the spare room until they figured out paperwork and all that. She spoke lightly, and everyone laughed. I smiled too, but inside I felt a small cold space open. It was like listening to people talk about rearranging a building while ignoring that some of its main beams were still carrying weight. I came back to the present and looked at the coffee in my cup. It had cooled a little. On the table in front of me sat my wallet and my old phone. I reached into my bag and took out the thin folder I had packed so automatically the night before. Inside were my passport, my birth certificate copy, some old bank documents, and one more item I had almost forgotten about. A small, dark USB drive taped to a sheet of paper with a note in my own handwriting. House plus firm docs, backup. I had made that backup years ago, after Adrian sent me scanned copies of the trust and the first version of Ryan's company agreement. I had spent an evening at my desk saving them to a drive, more from habit than fear. I labeled it and taped it to a sheet so I would not lose it. Then I put it into the folder and hardly thought about it again. Now it sat in my hand like a small, solid piece of memory. I also took out a small notebook I often carried. The last notes inside it were from the week before, a list of tasks related to the memorial arrangements. I turned to a new page. My hand did not shake. I wrote at the top, in block letters, House and Life. Under that, I listed a few words, one under the other. Bank, trust, title, Adrian, copies, witnesses. The list looked simple, but to me it was like a basic structural drawing. It showed the main points where forces would meet. The bank held records. The trust and title defined my place. Adrian understood the legal parts. Copies meant I needed to gather and protect every piece of paper. Witnesses meant people like Mrs. Talwar, perhaps even others who had been in the room yesterday. I stared at the list for a long time. At any point in my life, I could have chosen anger or loud demands. That is not who I am. I have always believed that structures, whether of steel or of family agreements, do not respond well to yelling. They respond to careful inspection and precise action. My phone lay on the table, screen facing down. I turned it over and looked at the messages. There were unread ones in the family group chat. Short phrases about organizing things, mostly from Lena, with a few hearts and supportive words from relatives. I did not open them. I had already heard all I needed to from them at the house. I found Adrian's name in my contacts. For a few seconds, I just looked at it, remembering that round table in his old office the day he explained the trust to Ryan and me. He had drawn a simple diagram on a legal pad, showing how the house and firm would pass from my generation to Ryan's, with my right to live in the house written clearly on one side. I had nodded and told him it all sounded good. Now I realized I needed to see that diagram again, not in my memory, but in writing. I typed a short message to him. I told him that a lot had changed, that I needed to go over everything we had done with the house and the trust. I added that I still had the backup drive he had sent me years ago. I kept the words plain and polite. Then I pressed send and set the phone down. The coffee shop around me carried on with its quiet life. A student typed at a laptop near the window. An older couple shared a pastry and read a newspaper together. The barista wiped the counter in slow circles. I sat there with a small notebook open in front of me, a USB drive beside it, and the knowledge that, for the first time in a long while, I was not just reacting to what others decided about my life. I was starting to look at the framework myself. Adrian answered my message faster than I expected. When I left the coffee shop and stepped out into the gray afternoon, my phone buzzed. His reply was short and to the point. He said I could come by his office the next morning. He added that it would be good to refresh our memories about the old documents. His office was in the same low building it had always been in, just off the main street. The sign outside was a little faded now, but the letters of his name and property and estate law were still clear. I had walked through that door many times in the past, usually to help Ryan with some new contract or to sign a small update. I had never come in feeling quite like this. Inside, the place smelled the same: coffee, printer toner, and the faint dry scent of old paper. Adrian's assistant greeted me and told me to sit in the small waiting area. A pot plant leaned toward the window, and a stack of magazines lay on the table, their covers months out of date. I did not pick one up. My mind was elsewhere. A few minutes later, Adrian opened the inner door and called my name. He looked almost exactly as I remembered. Tall, a little soft in the middle now, glasses halfway down his nose. There were more lines at the corners of his eyes, but they folded in a friendly way. He shook my hand and asked how I was holding up, his voice quiet. I gave him the simple answer, the only one I had. I said it had been a hard week. We went into his office and sat at the same round table where Ryan and I had sat years ago. Only now there was no Ryan. The emptiness of that space beside me pressed like a third person in the room, silent and heavy. I placed the small USB drive and the thin folder on the table. Adrian put on his glasses, picked up the drive, and turned it between his fingers. He asked if this was the backup we had made of the house and firm papers. I told him it was. He nodded and walked over to his computer. While he plugged it in and clicked through folders, I stayed seated, my hands flat on my knees. He opened the main file and scanned the first few lines. His brows drew together slightly, not in alarm but in focus. He clicked, scrolled, and clicked again. After a few minutes, he turned back to me. He said, in a careful tone, that I had done something very wise, even if I had not fully understood it at the time. He reminded me that when we set up the family trust, we had talked about 3 things: protecting the house, supporting Ryan's firm, and making sure I could live in the house as long as I needed. He said those ideas were all there, in the text. I asked him to explain it again, but slowly, as if we were starting fresh. He pulled a notepad closer and drew the same simple diagram he had drawn years ago. 3 boxes connected by lines. 1 box for the house, 1 for the firm, 1 for what he called Sam's life interest. He said the trust owned the house and most of Ryan's shares in the firm. Ryan had certain rights, Olivia had conditional rights as his spouse, and the children had future interests. But my right was different. It was written in as a long-term right to live in the house for life, unless I chose to leave on my own. It did not depend on Ryan being there or not. It did not depend on Olivia's wishes. He tapped the 3rd box on the drawing. He explained that, because we had talked once about what could happen if family relationships turned sour, he had added a clause back then, a condition tied to how I was treated in regard to housing and respect in the home. At the time, I had almost brushed it off, thinking it was too dark to plan for. Now it sat in the middle of the page like a quiet anchor. I felt both foolish and grateful. Foolish for not reading every word years ago. Grateful that the man in front of me had insisted on careful wording even when I did not want to think about that side of life. I told Adrian about the memorial reception in more detail. Olivia's speech, the clear 30 days, the silence in the room. I told him about leaving that night, about the motel, about the patrol car in front of the house that morning. I told him what Officer Rivera had said about records linked to my name and address. He listened without interrupting, pen resting on the pad. When I finished, he sat back and looked at the screen again. He said slowly that Olivia's public announcement might matter more than she realized. The trust clause he had added all those years ago did not speak about hurt feelings or private arguments. It spoke about attempts to push me out of the house or cut me off from it against the terms of the trust. It tied certain rights of the spouse and other heirs to their behavior in that respect. He said we would need proof of what she had said and how she had said it. Not just my word, but something clear. A recording. Statements from people who heard it. I thought of Mrs. Talwar standing on her porch with her phone lifted the day of the memorial. I mentioned her recording. Adrian's eyes sharpened a little. He said that if a neighbor had captured the speech, that could be very important. He printed a list of documents we should collect: updated title copies, loan records, any letters or emails from Ryan about the house, and of course, any recordings or written statements about what happened at the reception. From Adrian's office, I went straight to the bank. The branch was busy, with people waiting in a short line near the desks. I took a number and sat on a chair by the window, the list in my pocket. When they called my number, I walked to the desk of a clerk I had seen before, a man with thinning hair and a kind face. I explained that I needed copies of any records linking me to the house, the original loan, the title, any notes showing who was recorded as having rights there. I showed him an old account number from the folder and my identification. He typed for a while, his fingers moving quickly. Then he frowned slightly and stood up, saying he needed to ask a supervisor. He came back with a thin stack of printed pages. He said that the records showed I had been a co-signer on the original loan and that there was a separate note attached to the title indicating a long-term life interest in my name. He pointed to a line on the document. I read it slowly, tracing each word with my eyes. The words were simple, almost plain. They said that I had the right to live on the property for the rest of my life, as originally agreed when the house was built, regardless of changes in marital status or primary occupancy. It did not say I had to stay. It only said that if I wanted to, the law would stand behind me. The clerk made certified copies and placed them in an envelope for me. As I thanked him and walked out of the bank, the envelope felt heavier than it looked. It was not just paper, it was the written proof that I was not, and never had been, just a guest. From there, I went to my old workshop. Years ago, when Olivia wanted more space in the garage, we had rented a small storage unit on the edge of town. I had moved my tools, boxes of files, and old models there. The place smelled of wood, oil, and dust. When I rolled up the metal door, the familiar scent wrapped around me like a worn jacket. Inside, rows of boxes lined the walls. I had labeled most of them, but time and dust had faded the ink. I walked along slowly, reading my own handwriting. Site plans, invoices, personal letters, ward house, design, and contracts. I stopped at that last one and pulled it toward the light. I opened the box and found old drawings of the house, the first sketches, the final stamped plans, the inspection notes. Under those lay a folder with signed letters from Ryan, written before the trust was set up. In one, he wrote in his quick, excited style about how grateful he was that I would always have a room in the house, no matter what life does. Another letter was addressed to Adrian, asking him to make sure the legal papers reflected that promise. I sat on a small stool in the workshop and read those lines several times. My eyes did not blur, but my chest tightened. These letters were not law by themselves, but they showed Ryan's intent. That intent had guided Adrian's work. It connected my memories with the structure of the trust. I took out a portable scanner I had used for work years before and plugged it into an old laptop I kept in the unit. The machine was slow, but it still worked. One by one, I scanned the key documents: the letters, the early contracts, anything with clear language about my place in the house and the firm. I saved them onto a new USB drive, separate from the old one, and labeled it in big letters, House Plus Trust Proof. As I worked, the light outside shifted from pale to golden and then began to dim. Time passed, but I did not feel rushed. I was doing something I understood deeply: collecting data, organizing it, making sure that nothing important would be lost. Only this time, the project was not a bridge or a building. It was the frame of my own life. While I was in the workshop, my phone buzzed a few times. When I checked it during a break, I saw messages in the family group chat. One was from Lena. She wrote that she and Olivia were looking at new furniture layouts and that the house felt lighter already. She said she hoped I was taking time for myself and hinted again about that senior complex near the lake. Another message from Olivia was brief. She wrote that she hoped there would be no drama about the move and that we could all stay civil. She added a line about how she needed clarity on the house so she could plan her future with the children. There was no mention of the years I had already spent planning, building, and supporting that same future. I did not respond. I let the messages sit there, blue dots on the screen, while I copied files and labeled folders. Each beep from the phone sounded faint compared to the rustle of paper and the small hum of the scanner. By the time I locked the workshop and rolled the door down, the sky had gone dark. Streetlights cast pools of yellow on the asphalt. I placed the new USB drive and the envelope from the bank in the inner pocket of my jacket. The original folder went back into my bag. The next day, I met Adrian again. We spread the new documents on his table alongside the trust printout. He read the letters from Ryan with a quiet expression. He said they matched what he remembered from those early talks. He glanced at the bank title copies and nodded, his finger tapping the line about my life interest. He said there was one more person we needed to bring into the circle, the estate and trust lawyer who managed Ryan's will and the ongoing administration of the trust. Her name was Ms. Helena Novak. He said she had been waiting for some time to gather all the parties and settle the details that had been on hold since Ryan's passing. Adrian picked up the phone and called her office while I sat there, listening to his side of the conversation. He spoke in calm, precise terms. He said that new information had come up regarding my housing situation and that there were recordings and bank records that might affect how the trust should be applied. He did not raise his voice. He did not dramatize anything. He simply laid out the facts one after another like measurements on a blueprint. After he hung up, he told me that Ms. Novak would schedule a joint meeting with everyone who had a stake in the trust: Olivia, Lena, me, and any needed witnesses. It would take place at a mediation center, a neutral ground. The goal would be to review the trust, the will, and the recent events in one structured session. I left his office feeling strangely both heavy and clear. The weight came from knowing that a real confrontation was coming. Not the kind with shouting in a living room, but the kind with papers on a table and a person at the head of the room guiding the process. The clarity came from something simpler. I was no longer walking in the dark. I had documents in my pocket, names on my side, and a plan that did not depend on anyone's mood. That evening, I rented a small room near the city. It was nothing fancy, just a clean bed, a desk, a lamp, and a window that looked out over a row of rooftops. I placed my folder and the new USB drive on the desk, lined up neatly. I sat on the bed and looked at them, feeling a quiet steadiness settle into my bones. For years, I had tried to make myself smaller so that others could feel bigger in the house I built. Now I understood that there was another way. I did not need to shout or fight. I only needed to let the structure I had already put in place years ago stand in the light. The small room I rented near the city started to feel less like a stopgap and more like a quiet base. It had a narrow bed, a desk pressed against the wall, a small wardrobe, and a window that looked over rooftops and a bit of sky. There was nothing of my past in it, only my bag, my folder, and the 2 USB drives lined up neatly on the desk. In the mornings, I would make instant coffee, sit at the desk, and go through my notes. The page with the heading House and Life stayed open in front of me. Under it, the list I had written in the coffee shop stared back at me. Bank, trust, title, Adrian, copies, witnesses. Each word now had something next to it. A small checkmark or a short line. Documents collected, calls made, people informed. Adrian kept me updated as he spoke with Ms. Novak. He said she had reviewed the trust and Ryan's will again, and that the situation with the memorial reception and my sudden move had caught her attention. She was careful by nature, he said. She did not rush. She wanted everything in order before bringing everyone together. One afternoon, he called and asked if I could come by his office again. When I arrived, he had a short stack of papers on the table. He told me these were not the full trust or will. That would be for the joint meeting, but instructions that related to my rights and how Ms. Novak could act on them if needed. He walked me through them in general terms. I did not see every line, but I understood the shape of things. If certain conditions were met, she would have to apply parts of the trust in a way that might change how the house and the firm were handled. He asked if I was sure I wanted to move forward. I thought about that for a moment. Moving forward did not mean shouting at anyone or trying to punish them. It meant allowing the structure that already existed to do what it was designed to do. I told him yes, I was sure. He slid the papers closer, handed me a pen, and pointed where I needed to sign. My signature looked smaller than it used to, but my hand was steady. On my way back to the room that day, I passed a travel agency window. It showed posters of cities with bright skies and clean lines of buildings along rivers. I stopped for a moment and looked at them. One of the posters showed a place I knew well from stories, a country where Jonas had moved a few years before. He had sent me pictures of quiet streets, low houses, and small workshops with their doors open to the street. I had not spoken to Jonas in some time. He had started as an apprentice at Ryan's firm, a young man who listened more than he talked and who took notes when I explained why a beam needed one more bolt. Over the years, he had become almost like a son to me. When he left to work abroad, I felt proud and a little sad. Now, standing in front of that window, I thought of him again. Back in my room, I scrolled through my contacts until I found his name. I sent a simple message. I asked how he was, how work was going, and if the stories about his small workshop by the river were true. I added that things at home had changed a lot, and that I might need some advice about starting fresh somewhere new. He replied later that evening with a long, warm message. He wrote about the town where he lived, about the way people there respected careful work and did not hurry to tear down old things that still function. He sent a photo of his workshop, tools hanging in neat rows, a simple wooden sign with his name over the door. At the end, he asked what I meant about things changing at home. I did not pour everything out at once. I told him the basic facts. Ryan's memorial, Olivia's speech, my move out of the house, the trust I had set up years ago, and the upcoming meeting with Ms. Novak. I said I was not looking for pity, only considering options. I asked, almost as a side note, whether someone his age could use a pair of old hands in a small construction shop. He wrote back that he could always use another pair of hands, especially ones that had taught him most of what he knew. He said there was a small unit near his workshop that often sat empty and that the cost of living was simpler than in our city. He did not push me. He just drew a picture with his words of a place where my skills would still matter. I printed out a simple flight schedule to his city and placed it on the desk next to my passport. I did not book anything. I did not tell anyone in the family about these thoughts. For now, it was enough to know that my life did not end at the edge of the ward house's porch. At the bank, I opened a new account in my own name, completely separate from anything tied to the house or the firm. The clerk helped me set it up and asked if I wanted online access. I said yes. He also helped me open another account that could receive international transfers. When he asked if I wanted to add a joint holder later, I said that might be possible. I told Jonas about the new account and asked if he would be comfortable opening one on his side that could receive funds to expand his workshop. He was surprised, but pleased. He said he could talk to his local bank and find out what was needed. Again, I did not promise anything. I only said I wanted options ready in case I chose to move. Meanwhile, messages from Lena and Olivia continued. They talked about meetings with Ms. Novak and how it would be good to get everything settled so they could plan. In one message, Lena wrote that it would be a relief to have clarity about the house and the firm, so everyone knew what belonged to who. Olivia wrote that she wanted to get through this with as little stress as possible, and that she hoped I would not complicate things. I read every word but did not reply. There is a certain freedom in not answering when people expect a response. It leaves space for their own thoughts to echo back at them. For years, I had been the one to smooth conversations, to fill silence with reassurance. Now I let the silence stand. One evening, as the light faded over the rooftops, I spread my notes, bank papers, and Adrian's summaries on the desk. I traced the path of my life with the tip of a pen, from the first lines of the house plans to the trust to the present moment. I realized that, all this time, I had believed I was simply supporting others. In truth, I had also been creating a kind of shield around myself without fully knowing it. I thought about moving back into the house. By the logic of the papers, I could have pushed for that. I could have walked in with a copy of the title and a smile and told Olivia that I would be staying in my small room, as was my right. But every time I imagined that, my chest felt tight. The idea of walking those halls again, hearing the same voices in the rooms, knowing what had been said about me, it felt like walking into a building where the walls had shifted just enough to be unsafe. I decided something simple. I would not fight to stay in a place where I was no longer wanted. I would fight only to make sure that the way I was pushed out had its cost. The house, the firm, the trust, those were structures I had helped build. If others wanted to change their place in those structures, they would have to accept what the foundations demanded. A few days later, Adrian called to say that Ms. Novak's office had fixed a date and time for the joint meeting. It would be at a mediation center, not at her regular office. He said this was standard when families needed neutral ground. He read the details to me: address, room number, the list of people invited. My name, Olivia's, Lena's, and 2 more. Officer Rivera and neighbor witness, Ms. Talwar. Hearing those names gave me a quiet sense of support. I had not asked Rivera or Mrs. Talwar to do anything beyond what they already had. Still, the fact that they would be there meant I would not be the only one in the room who remembered that day at the house as something more than a family talk. On the day before the meeting, I met Adrian once more. We sat at his round table, and he went over what to expect. He said Ms. Novak would lead the session, speak about the trust and the will in plain language, and then ask questions about recent events. He reminded me that I did not need to argue. I only needed to answer questions clearly and let the documents and witnesses speak. He also suggested I think about what I wanted afterward, not in legal terms, but in practical ones. If the trust was applied a certain way, there might be money from the house or shares from the firm. He asked if I had thought about what to do with that. I told him about Jonas and the possible move. He listened, nodded, and said that starting something new with someone who respected me sounded like a good use of whatever came. That night, in my room, I packed my bag again, but this time differently. I laid out simple clothes for the meeting: clean shirt, dark trousers, the jacket that still fit well. Into the bag went my folder with the bank copies, the notes from Adrian, the letters from Ryan, and the 2 USB drives. I placed my passport and the printed flight schedule under the folder, flat against the bottom of the bag, where no one would see them if the bag was opened on a table. I slept more lightly than usual, but I did sleep. When the alarm buzzed in the morning, I turned it off and sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment. I thought of Ryan, of the day we poured the foundation, of his promise that I would always have a place under that roof. I thought of how promises can survive in written form, even when people forget them in daily life. The mediation center was in a modern building not far from the city center. The lobby was bright, with white walls and simple chairs in neat rows. A receptionist sat behind a desk, speaking quietly on the phone. On one wall, a screen listed room numbers and last names scheduled for the day. I saw ours on the list: Ward, Trust Review. I arrived early, as I always do. It is a habit from years on building sites, where being early means you see the structure in stillness before the noise starts. I took a seat in a corner of the lobby, my bag at my feet, my folder resting on my knees. People came and went. Some looked tense, some bored, some calm. After a while, I saw Olivia and Lena enter through the glass doors. They were dressed sharply, their movements precise. They spoke to each other in low tones and did not look around at first. When Olivia finally saw me, her expression froze for a fraction of a second and then shifted into something smooth and polite. Lena lifted her hand in a small wave and then checked her phone. A few minutes later, I saw Officer Rivera come in, her uniform neat, her posture straight. She nodded when our eyes met and took a seat near the reception desk. Not long after that, Mrs. Talwar arrived, wearing a plain shawl, holding her bag tightly. She looked around until she spotted me, then gave a small smile that reached her eyes. We all sat there, separate, waiting for the same door to open. I placed my hand lightly on the folder in my lap. It did not feel like a weapon. It felt like a level, or a measuring tape, a tool to check if what people claimed matched what had actually been built. Ms. Novak opened the file and spoke in simple terms. She confirmed my life right in the house, then played Annika's recording. Olivia's voice filled the room, clear about the 30 days. Rivera summarized her report, and Ms. Novak pointed to the respect clause. She said Olivia's and Lena's claims shifted. Control of the house and firm moved to me, with a protected share for the children. Papers slid across the table. I signed, returned my house keys, and stood. A few hours later, I sat at the airport gate, ticket beside my folder, waiting to board the plane ahead.